Next up is Conrad. And Conrad Armstrong is going to is our first presenter today. He will tell us about photo editing software and puzzle design. Conrad grew up in a household that had a few dozen 1930 wooden jigsaw puzzles that his grandparents had acquired. When his father, Bob, bought a scroll saw in 1990, Conrad took to it like a fish to water. Having seen and admired the cutting styles and tricks of cutters from earlier eras. He's been cutting puzzles sporadically since then for his family and friends and for customers on commission. A few years ago, he quit his job as a software engineer to focus more on cutting puzzles. Conrad, please share your screen now.
And I'll unmute myself. Thank you, Joe. And thank you everyone for attending this parley. Get my windows ready. I've been cutting puzzles for decades, but only in recent years did I start to use photo editing software for a few aspects of puzzle design. Before I get into that though, I want to give some caveats. First, I use a scroll saw to cut wooden puzzles, and I do not use a computer to design all the pieces. I have no experience designing patterns for CNC laser cutters. So if that's what you're looking for, I'm sorry I can't help you. But later today, there is a roundtable of laser cut puzzle makers, so maybe they can answer those types of questions. Secondly, I realize some of you out there may not be very technically savvy. I'm guessing you're technical enough to sign up for this Puzzle Parley and use Zoom, but maybe you're afraid of using new software, and that's okay. Other people out there may be experts in using something like Photoshop and already know everything I'm about to talk about and can probably give me a lesson in this. It's hard to tailor this presentation to a wide audience. So I'm not trying to give a tutorial here. I'm not expecting people to remember every mouse click that I make and every menu I use. I'm just hoping to show you some concepts that can be done so that in the future, if you feel like trying them out, you can look up tutorials or documentation on applying those concepts. You've probably heard of a software program called Photoshop. It was the first and most successful professional graphics editing software package. It's very powerful and functional and is used by design professionals around the world. It has even become a generic term and a verb. If a photo has been photoshopped, it means the photo has been digitally edited using software, whether it's Photoshop or something similar, to remove something or change the shape of a model's body or remove skin blemishes, etc. But that software is very expensive, and I didn't think I needed all the expert features that it has. So I found a free photo editing software application called paint.net that is regularly updated, has plenty of functionality, and I've been very happy with it. Please note that the name is paint.net, not just Paint or MS Paint or Microsoft Paint. Those are the names of a very basic, or what I call a brain dead photo editing software application. Also, unfortunately, the people who named it weren't smart enough to grab the web domain paint.net. If you go to paint.net in your web browser, you'll get to a dummy website. To get the software, you need to go to getpaint.net. I also like that there are plenty of short tutorials on YouTube made by users of the software. Most of what I learned about this, I got by going to YouTube and typing into the YouTube search field, paint.net, and whatever else I was trying to learn about. Unfortunately, paint.net is only for Windows. There is not a Mac version or iOS. However, I'm confident that there's some sort of free or inexpensive photo editing software for Mac that has similar functionality. I'm wondering if Chris could comment on that later. And as I mentioned before, I'm not here to give a tutorial on paint.net. I'm hoping to teach you some concepts that can be used in puzzle design, regardless of what software application is used. So what are we actually talking about? Just a few things. There isn't a lot of time. We'll try to wrap this up by 1:40, so we have 5 minutes for questions. Talk about alpha blur, and then we're going to modify a pattern for a figure piece, and in doing so, we'll learn about the lasso select. Then we'll make an outline out of a silhouette, and in doing so, we'll learn about the magic wand. And then we'll use layers, and if we have time, we'll try cropping an image to an unusual shape. Now I'm going to share my paint.net window if I can find it. Why does this always happen? There we go. All right, so this is paint.net. I'm not going to go over all the icons, and if you install the software, the toolbars might be in a different location or look differently. So let's talk about alpha blur. I'm going to open an example. It's the easiest way to show you. This example of alpha blur is at the center of the image is in focus, and as you get towards the edge, it just fades into nothingness or fades into another color, in this case, white. And in my case, I had this photo. This was of a couple that got married. They're friends of a friend of mine, and they got married on the ski slope. This was taken by the wedding photographer, and there's a chairlift behind them. And my friend and I thought that this would make a good wedding gift, but I didn't like the colors around the edges. I want to do something, quote, interesting with the edge, and that's a very subjective term. But when you cut an irregular outline, you have the option of, I'm just going to draw on the screen here. Let's use a different color so you can really see it. You can cut around things in the scene, like the trees, like that, maybe around the edge of the chairlift, but I just didn't think that would make sense in this. I thought that would look awkward. I'm going to undo those changes. I want to do something like that rose that you saw, have it fade to white as it goes towards the edge, because I want to do some sort of edge like this, and then do snowflakes sticking out of the edge. Now I'm using a mouse, not a stylus, so these are about the ugliest snowflakes you can imagine. And I'm drawing over here. So you get sort of the general idea of the concept I wanted to do is that I wanted them in focus and then have it fade to white as you get towards the edge. I'm going to undo these changes and just apply it. It's very simple. You select roughly what you want to keep. And now I want to delete everything outside that. So I'm going to move my window a little bit so I can see my menus. Pardon me. There we go. I'm going to invert the selection and delete that. Now this checkerboard pattern doesn't mean that if I print this out, my printer is going to print checkerboard. This is the software telling me that there's actually nothing there, not even white. It's very analogous to negative space or a dropout on a puzzle. Or another way to look at it is, if those of you who are old enough to remember transparencies for overhead projectors, think of this rectangle as a transparency, and the checkerboard is completely clear. And then within the oval is opaque with the image. I'm just going to resize this and center it a little bit. And the alpha blur is just an effect. There are a whole bunch of interesting or weird visual effects that come with the software. And there's some aspects about it that I can control, like the softness of the edge or how much I want it to fade in and out. And you'll really see the effect when I now fill in that empty space with white. And so I took this, say this as a JPEG, and took it to my Staples, had them printed out at 11 by 17. I didn't use software to plan out the edge. I took this, glued it to wood, and I used sort of traditional ways of taking my paper patterns for snowflakes and putting them around the edge. And I'll show you the final result. And I just really like how it's white around the edge. Again, my personal subjective artistic opinion, I wouldn't have liked the chairlift and the trees to be seen around the edges of this. So that's alpha blur. Let's move on to figure pieces. Like many scroll saw cutters, I use a temporary pattern for my figure pieces, either drawing directly on the paper. I know some people will draw a print directly onto sort of a sticky tape, or you can print out a shape on paper, and then I use rubber cement to temporarily adhere the pattern to the puzzle so I can follow the line, be pretty precise. Then I can remove the paper because rubber cement lets you do that. The internet, and in particular Google Images, is an easy place to find a silhouette or an outline of anything that you want to cut. Let's see if I can share my Google. You know. I want to point out that I don't have time to talk about potential copyright issues using clip art that you find online, and I'm not a lawyer even if I did have time. At 2:30 today, Rebecca Tushnet will talk about copyright issues around puzzle making and hopefully help us learn what we can and cannot use. For this presentation, I'm going to assume that if you found clip art that you want to use as a figure piece pattern, that you have done all the appropriate research as to whether or not you can use it for your situation. So I'm going to search for dancer outline. And I could go to the images tab, but I know that the one I want is right here. I'm going to copy that image. See if I can go back to paint.net. I'm going to create a new window and paste it. Now, if you remember from a few minutes ago, you can see that this is all negative space, not even white. And that looks like a decent figure piece. But if you think about it, if you use this for 1.5 inch or 2 inch tall figure piece, I think this tutu is too close to the arm. It would be too thin in here, and the piece that goes into the crook under her arm would be too fragile and would probably break. This happens a lot with human figures where an arm might be on the waist or legs of an animal. Now, with simple or brain dead photo editing software, you can usually only select in a rectangular area, but that's not really useful here, is it? I'm going to undo that. But there's this thing called lasso select, which is actually a generic term. It's not specific to paint.net. And I forgot to mention that alpha blur is also a generic term. You know, there's alpha blur effect does exist in Photoshop and other photo editing software applications. Lasso select will select, instead of a rectangle, exactly where I draw the mouse. Now I'm going to be careful between the tutu and the arm. All right, now I can kind of roughly go around her leg. And I think that's about what I want to manipulate. I want to tilt her leg down and the tutu so there's more space between the tutu and the arm. So I can move it. I can also rotate it. So I'm going to do a little combination of both. And that looks pretty good. I figure whatever size I'm comfortable cutting this out such that the arms don't break, I think the space between the arm and the tutu will also be big enough. Now, since this is a pattern and not something that's actually be printed or seen, I probably could just wing it as I'm cutting and not worry about how her body isn't connected there. But I could also erase little sections and draw that back in so that her torso is a little more angled. Now, before I rotated the tutu, the other part of the tutu was in perfect, the same plane, so to speak. So I don't have to, but I think I'm going to do that same kind of rotation for the bottom segment. I can move it and I can just rotate it so it's really kind of on the same parallel plane as as the upper part of the tutu. And I can fill in this bottom part. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I could print it out from here, but then I'm gonna have to deal with scaling and size issues. What I like to do, once I'm done with my figure piece pattern, is I copy it and just paste it into the Word document. I essentially keep a Word document with my running collection or repertoire of figure pieces. This actually isn't it, but I just put a few of them here. Because I'm pretty good at judging, well, this is 8.5 wide. Well, this is too big. Maybe I want to make it smaller. But it's also, I can compare it to my existing figure pieces. And if I've been happy with this as the size of California, I can kind of use that as a guide and size it to something like that. But even the first time with a new figure piece pattern, sometimes I'm not really sure what size is best until you print it and cut it out and put it on the puzzle. So the first time so that's my best guess as to what size I want. I'm going to make 2 more copies of it, make one of them a little bit smaller, one of them a little bit larger. Now I could print all 3 of these out, and maybe I find that, oh, the big one was the one I really like. So I'll just go back and delete and leave this one in my running Word document of figure pieces that I can then go back and choose from for future puzzles. I'm going to go back to Google Chrome, if I can find it. For most shapes that you search for, you can find an outline like I had here, but sometimes you can only find a silhouette that doesn't have an outline version of it. Let's take this one. Let's say this is what you really wanted, but you couldn't find just an outline. Well, I certainly could print this out, after putting this into my Word document and sizing it, but look at all that filled in black. I really only need the outline. And if you have an inkjet printer, you know that ink is ridiculously expensive. And if you print out a lot of these figure paste patterns, it'd be wasting a lot of black ink. So I want to make an outline out of the silhouette. Now it's just a simple effect that I could run that it knows the difference between something that's one color versus another color, and it will essentially draw pixels around the black. And then theoretically, then I can go in and delete the contents. Now, how can that happen? I'm now going to pause and tell you about something called the magic wand, which is also a generic term or tool that's available in good photo editing applications. And I'm just temporarily going to make some changes to this to show you what the magic wand can do. Magic wand will, anywhere I click, it's suddenly going to select all of the other pixels next to it that are the same color. Notice how it's selected all the black. If I click here, it'll select all the orange. I click here, it'll select all the green. And that's a very easy way to select a certain color area and do something with it. I'm going to undo these temporary color changes to go back to just the silhouette. So the plan is I want to draw an outline around her, and then I can select her, the contents of her, and delete it. However, if the outline is black, then there isn't going to be a difference. There needs to be a difference between the outline and the contents for me to be able to select the contents and leave the outline. I could draw the outline in some other color, but I also don't, it's cheaper to print out black ink than color ink. So I'm just going to change her to any other color that's not black. Now, in the same way that the magic wand is smart enough to, wherever I click, just follow the image from where I clicked and select everything that's that color, the paint bucket can do the same thing, and it's just going to fill it in with whatever color I selected. I selected red, boom. So I just changed her to be red. Now I can use the outline effect. Why is it not? Oh, let's try this again. There we go. Now that she's surrounded by a black line, I can very easily click on the red, delete it. Now I have a nice outline instead of a filled in black silhouette, and that'll save me a lot of black ink over time. It may seem like a trivial thing, but it's actually very trivial for me to do once I learn the tools. Change the color, fill her in, change color to black, do an outline, boom, I'm done. And then select her contents and delete it. It's very easy. Now I'd like to talk about layers, which is an important concept in any decent photo editing software application. With basic photo editing software, you're always editing your one and only image. Go back to paint.net, which I can't find. Let's just go to this photo. Let's pretend that I'm not in paint.net. pretend I'm in a software application that only has one layer, one image. That means that any change you're making changes to the pixels here. And although you could undo, you can only undo your latest and then the thing before that and the thing before that. You can't make a change, make 6 other changes, and then go back and change that first change. I'll show you what I mean. I'm just gonna write congrats. And we'll draw some hearts. Let's say I really like where those hearts were, but I want to change the color of congrats. I want to move it. I can't select that and then move it because look, I'm selecting moving, not just the grass, but the stuff behind it. And even if I tried to use my magic wand to select just the C, try to move that, what was underneath it is empty space now, because when I typed in the congrats and these hearts, it overwrote whatever pixels were there. And so it's very difficult to make edits and then go back and change other edits and get back what was underneath there. So instead, let me undo these changes. I'm going to add a layer. This is like a transparency. Imagine that if this photo was a paper photo on your desk and you took a transparency and put over it, and then you could use erasable magic markers on the transparency. You're not writing on the actual photo. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing. I'm going to write congrats. I'm going to draw some hearts. And now I decide, I want to center that congrats. I can now just select it roughly and move it and watch what happens. It slides over it because what I'm actually operating in is this little transparency that's over the photo. I'm going to click this checkbox, which is just going to temporarily hide this layer that has the photo, and you'll see what I mean. That's really what I was operating in, and that's why when I select something that is in this layer, I'm able to move it around and still get back to or see what was in the real photo. And when you're done and you like the layout, then you can merge the layers together and save it as one JPEG and print it out. So when do I use this kind of thing? I use it typically doing letters or numbers when I want them to overlap. This is that same puzzle. I cut the figure pieces of their dates, of the date of the wedding. And I decide to stagger them and overlap them. In order to get it just right, I use layers. So I'm gonna do something similar. I'm gonna make a monogram. I tried my initials, but I didn't like how the C looked. I tried my dad's initials, but he has 2 A's, which was confusing. So I'm actually gonna make a monogram for Ann Williams's initials. Just give me a moment while I just sort of resize this and make it more reasonable to work with. This is a font that I found that I like because it's got thick letters, which can work as figure pieces, it can work as dropouts, and it's got some style to it. So let's say I want to make the D overlap. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouse. Overlap the A. Whoops. I selected negative space, and so the software is trying to put negative space over that A. So I don't like that. You might be thinking, oh, you could use the magic wand to select just the D. And actually, you're right. I'm going to move that and kind of overlap the A. And let's say I'm going to do that with the W as well. Now, if I want to do something different, maybe I want the W at the same level as the A. I want the A and then the lower D and the W. I can't go back and select just one of these letters because they're all connected now. Even if I try to use my lasso select, carefully go over what was the D, it's going to move more than I wanted to because I was operating in one layer. So I'm going to undo these changes. And I'm going to put each letter in its own layer. I created 2 new layers. I don't have to rename them, but I can just to keep track of them. And so it'll make it a little more obvious. I'm gonna call this layer A. Middle layer will be layer D. Layer W. I'm gonna cut the D from the layer that currently has all the letters. And I selected, I changed my focus to the other layer and I pasted it right in the layer D. I'm going to do the same thing with the W. These are now in separate layers. I'm going to temporarily hide and then re-show each layer to get that point across. That is the A layer. This is the D layer. And this is the W layer. It's again, like you have 3 transparencies over each other and each transparency has 1 layer. Now imagine you can slide around those transparencies on each other, maybe rotate them. And then at some point, take a picture of those 3 whatever's formed by those 3 transparencies. So now I can very easily do a quick select. The rectangular select is certainly much quicker to use than the lasso select. And you might think, oh no, it's going to drag over the parts of the other layers. It's actually not, because if I temporarily turn off the other layers, I was just operating in this layer. So let's say I want to do that. I have to go to the W layer, move the W. I changed my mind. I want the W to be at the same level as the A. And I want the D, because that's the middle initial, to be a little smaller. Oops, I was in the wrong layer. I'd have to be in the D layer. Now I need to move the W to be closer to the D. And so you see how I was able to manipulate the contents of each layer, each transparency, independently. And only when I'm finally done, I can say, okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to merge the layers together. And if you remember from earlier in this presentation, I'm going to change the contents of it to a different color so I can make an outline of it. So I can then use the magic wand to then delete the color. Now, I suppose I could cut into it and make a dead end cut for the interior of the A and the D, but I'm just going to delete that. There's my single piece monogram for ADW. So that's what I often use layers for. They're very important. I've had some things with 30 layers occasionally going on. It lets you make changes that are independent to other changes within the same conceptual image. And only at the very end, when you're happy, you can merge them together into one JPEG. How are we doing for time here? Not bad. I'm going to show you a little topic that isn't a big deal, but cropping to an unusual shape. This is a photograph of my dad and my brothers. It's from years ago. My youngest niece is now a graduate from college, but this has the right size that I wanted. Now, if you wanted to cut this into a rectangle, you don't need to draw anything. You can just draw a ruler or even eyeball it if you're close to the edge. And if you want to do a circle, you could probably trace that out using a bowl or compass. But what if you want to do an unusual shape? Let's say that I want to do a house. I'm not going to switch my the focus right now, but I'm on Google Images and I'm just going to search for house outline. I'm going to copy it and you should know by now, I'm not going to paste it over this image. I'm going to create a new layer and paste it into this new layer. I'm going to use the magic wand to get rid of the white, to select the white so I can delete it, select the interior white so I can delete it. And again, this house, now just a black outline, is essentially only in that own layer. I'm temporarily hiding and showing the image that this additional layer is over. Now I'm going to resize it, position it. Isn't that kind of cute? Now I could print this out and just cut along the interior of that black line. But what if you wanted to essentially do that, but then have what's outside of the house be white, so that you could then have letters or something else that's poking out? Sort of similar to my snowflakes on the alpha blur, but this is a sharp cropping. Well, to do that, I'm just going to temporarily hide the image so you can see. In the same way that the magic wand knows how to select everything that's black or red, it also knows if I click here, it's going to select all of that negative space until it ran into something that wasn't negative space, which is the black outline of the house. So with one click, I've essentially told the software to make a selection, which is this outer rectangle, but not the black house outline and the contents of it. It's like a selection rectangle with a house space within it. The neat thing is I can now apply that. So that's a selection shape. It's a selection criteria. It's a weird selection shape. I can apply that to a different layer. So just by selecting this other layer, this selection, anything I do with this selection criteria is going to apply to the layer that I'm currently focused on. I can not just hide this layer with a house. I can even delete it, but I'll just hide it to give you an idea. It's as if I was just on this photo and somehow told the software, I want you to select everything that's outside of this house. And because it's selected, I can easily delete it. And then I could easily use the paintbrush to fill it in as white. Now I can print this out and use traditional figure piece patterns to write the family name sticking out from the bottom or something on the roof. It's not something to use often, but I thought it was a quick effect that, or an effect that wouldn't take me long to show. I'm running up on 140. Some of you are probably asking, well, what about removing something from the image? Like, what if I don't like, actually this shoe here was part of a stranger over there. Well, that actually takes longer to do and longer to describe, and there isn't a very magic way of doing it, at least not that I know of. It's done by copying and pasting other areas over what you want to get rid of. And I'll just show you an example of what I did years ago. This is a photo of a couple of friends, and I thought it was great. This is on Lion's Head Trail on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. I didn't like these other strangers in the background, and even over her shoulder, that's someone else that's behind her. And I was lucky that the background is kind of modeled rather than a flat color or someone's face. But I essentially just took a lot of little areas and kept copying and pasting them over what I wanted to hide. And the end result was this, which I was pretty happy with. And I printed that out and did that as a puzzle, before and after. But again, there's not, not like you can point to this person and say, remove her. If you do that, it'll be blank. And then you have to kind of fill it in on your own using your own artistic judgment of what you want to appear behind there. So in summary, we covered alpha blur. We showed the lasso select in modifying figure pieces. We showed the magic wand and the paint bucket in making an outline out of a silhouette. We showed using layers and cropping an image to an unusual shape. Melinda, I'm guessing there's some questions. I see 40 messages in the chat window.
Yes, we've had quite a few comments. Everybody thought it was great. They loved what you did with the snowflakes and the outline of for the skiers. There were a number of questions on various aspects of what you did. I will start with, let's see. On the dancers, somebody remarked, did you happen to check in public domain on things that you could use? And I'd also like to add from myself that when you selected that figure piece, I got it from a Dover editing book years ago.
Well, that's why I gave that copy up front. I have used, specifically sometimes gone to sites that have clip art that is definitely free. I find a very limited selection on some of those. So hopefully Rebecca Trishnet will tell us more about what's usable and what's not.
Okay. How do you use your Word file when you're cutting puzzles? How do you use the library?
So I keep a Word document with all sorts of figure pieces that I've slowly developed. Like some of them I drew by hand before Google Images existed, and then I scanned them in. Now I have a scanner. And I'll go look through it and I find some that I like. I don't print out the whole document each time. I'll take a cat from page 3 and a house from page 7 and a airplane from page 15 and copy those and paste those onto a fresh page. And so I can print out a single page that has the 8 figure pieces that I want to cut for the current puzzle. And then I cut each one out. And as I said, I think many cutters do, they use rubber cement to temporarily adhere that pattern to the puzzle.
Great. Everybody was very happy that this is going to be added to YouTube. There were a lot of people that were delighted to find out, oh, this is how it really works. The last thing, I think the main issues, one of the questions was, what font did you use for ADW?
I can find that out. Actually, it's something called Moth-Proof Script. And I think if you just Google that, you'll find it. So it doesn't come with Word, but it was a free download to add to Word, I believe. Moth-Proof. I want to paste that into the chat.
Great. The last the last thing I have for you is that a number of people were, you had mentioned that you were working on Word, or I'm sorry, on a Mac, on PC. And was there any software available for the Apple? We got, I think, Procreate, but it was a little hard to learn. There's Elements, Photoshop Elements, which is a cheaper version, and GIMP, which one person at least did not like. So,
you know what? I tried GIMP years ago, and I just found the user interface incredibly confusing and difficult to learn. So I switched over to paint.net.
Great. That's it. Thank you so much, Conrad.
Thank you, everyone.